Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael Bach, and I'm the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and I also have the pleasure of being a director of the Canadian Club Board. I want to start by acknowledging that we're meeting today on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation. I'd like to give a shout out to an app. It's called Whose Land, which is available for iPhone and Android. If you're on BlackBerry, it's 2019. But it's a fantastic free app that you can get. You can download and learn more about the deep history of the Indigenous communities that we live with. So I'd encourage you to check that out. This is our third LGBTQ2 plus event in the Canadian Club history. Shame and clap at the same time. No, the club is 120 years old, and I've had the pleasure of being on the board for the past 6 years, dragging it, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And I'm really proud of where we have come, that this is our third event, and we're really pushing the envelope and doing some things that our competitors are not. It is also my last event. After 6 years, my term with the board ends next Wednesday, so it's a bittersweet moment, but it means I'm eventually going to take off my clothes tonight. I know. Bruce is like, oh no, not again. I'm really proud of the work that we've done around diversity and inclusion and diversifying not only the board of directors, but also the podium. I'm really proud of the fact that we have speakers that represent the city of Toronto and the country that we live in. You all are social media junkies, and I expect you all to be tweeting and posting on Instagram fabulous pictures of me, of course, but I get approval. CDN Club TO, so please make sure you mention us. We need to invite our wonderful speaker, Zach Stafford, up to draw business cards. Come and join me here. It's really a thing. It's really a thing.
I'm from America. I thought it was a Canadian
euphemism. They don't have business cards in the United States, apparently.
Okay.
And who's our winner?
Luc Lavoisier.
Luc, félicitations. You're winning a complimentary bottle of wine from the Foreign Affairs Winery in Vineland, Ontario. So that's apparently, if you wondered what the Foreign Affairs did, now you know. That's it. Yeah. God. I'd also like to welcome our webcast viewers who are joining us as well. Welcome. And thank you to McKesson, our sponsor for today. Thank you for supporting the club, as well as to Navigator for having us in your space. I don't know where Jamie is, but I'm sure he will. He's where?
In France, yeah.
He's in France. How lovely for him. Never mind. I take my thank you back. Yes, he's with the Queen. Which Queen? He's celebrating D-Day. Okay. This is exactly how a Canadian club goes. The audience just completely heckles me. So we have a very special guest today. Zach Stafford is the editor-in-chief of The Advocate, America's oldest LGBT magazine. He also hosts the podcast The 10. Zach has many leadership roles at well-known print publications. No matter his title, he works to advance LGBTQ issues by tackling challenges like harassment and discrimination. He served as the chief content officer. I love this one. I'm just going to pick up the page for a second. He served as the chief content officer of Grindr.
Yes, honey.
I want to know what that involves. Is it just flicking through dick pics? Is that yes, no, yes, yes? But he was the editor-in-chief of their magazine Into, one of the most read queer digital publications in the world. He was editor-at-large for Out magazine and was an award-winning journalist at The Guardian. Zach is also a regular media commentator and a best-selling author, the award-winning journalist and advocate. He has also appeared on Forbes 30 Under 30. So, he's an underachiever is really what's happening here. Zach is also joined by my fellow board director, David Simmons, who is the Senior VP of Communications and Public Affairs for McKesson, and they're going to have a little chat about queer storytelling. So with that, Zach, David, I am pleased to turn the podium over to you.
Hi,
Tuck it in, girl.
Needing retucked.
I mean,
God.
come on, honey.
It's been a day.
It's been.
I was in New York a few hours ago. Now I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here.
Very happy. Can we get a bottle of wine for the table?
I mean,
That's actually
let's
not a
get it.
joke. That's not even a
Sauvignon
joke.
Blanc, please. Mhm.
That's not a joke.
So
I'm
really-
not eating. This is gonna get real wild. I'm gonna talk about Grindr, and you're all gonna learn about yourselves. real
Stop
quick.
giving away all the secrets.
Y'all
He
gonna
has a
really,
code.
you're gonna learn quick what does chief content officer mean. Wow, that is loud. I'm not gonna do that. Okay.
Welcome to Canada.
Welcome, Zach, to Canada, everybody.
Oh, wow.
Is this your first visit to Canada?
No, it's not.
Oh.
I considered moving to Canada in 2012.
Oh.
I was telling a few folks this. You know, there are moments in your life where you look at two roads that are in front of you, and one of them is the obvious choice, and the other is the one that you shouldn't do, but you most likely do to piss off your mom. Not moving to Canada was the thing I did to piss off my mom. I was going to go to grad school here at a university called York. I also was looking at University of Toronto, and I was going to do graduate work in geography. And while that sounds maybe crazy to you, Americans think that's crazy. My mother is in academia, my family's in academia. They love that I was going into the Ivory Tower. But I got back from a visit and I said, you know what I want to do? I want to be a writer. And my family freaked. And I went and became a writer. And what was so interesting about that is they were like, oh, why are you telling these stories about queer people? Like, we love you that you're gay, we love that you care about these things, but there's no way you could have a viable career or life or have impact in the world if you only talk about queer people. And I kept sticking to it. And you know, the beginning was rough. I was really broke. I worked like a ton of jobs and I didn't make any money as a columnist. And then I kind of clawed my way up and the world began to change little by little. And I began to tell stories that were more complicated, like queer people in the Black Lives Matter movement, queer people in the climate change movement. And as you know, marriage passed and became legal in America, and all these things changed, and then Donald Trump happened, I eventually was able to kind of figure out where I was supposed to go, and it was to lead a queer magazine and work with Grindr, do all these things. But what I learned really quickly is, you know, storytelling is not something people should be saying, like, don't go into that. Because, you know, every day we all tell stories. And stories are something that we as humans do innately to stay alive. You wake up and you look at your partner, your best friend, your dog, and you say, how's it going? And then that person, not your dog usually, but other people, answer that with a story. And so storytelling, what you should know most of all, especially in the age of Donald Trump, is the thing that will save us. And it's the thing that will keep you waking up tomorrow. And I'm very grateful that I did choose the path to piss off my mom, even though I do like Toronto, besides your traffic today.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience that are excited about tonight's conversation and excited about conversations moving forward. You mentioned The Advocate. My good friend Michael mentioned that you're editor-in-chief of The Advocate.
Yes.
You're the youngest editor in The Advocate's history, which is pretty exciting. You're also the first person of color to edit that magazine,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we will get back to that in a minute, but you talked about storytelling. You titled this session, Queer Stories Have Power. Tell me about the importance of storytelling in the queer context in today's environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, we live in a moment in which queer people are able to see themselves in more places than ever before. You watch TV and you see a character that's you. You go to the grocery store and you see a Pampers ad, and that's you kind of there. But what's really important right now is to not let ourselves be stuck on just representation. We're at a moment where we can have really complicated conversations about our lives. And when we look at the American context currently, what I think has become really important through queer storytelling and queer journalism is that it becomes a way for us to understand the depths of oppression or the depths of these complicated systems or the depths of power, really. So, you know, over the past few years, we've been thinking a lot in America about immigration. When I was at Grindr, I used a lot, we can get to the Grindr thing, but at Grindr, it...
Four.
Okay, got it. Won't go there. But anyway, at Grindr, I was able to use Grindr Capital to invest in a journalism team to be embedded inside a caravan in Mexico. That you all may have heard of when it was crossing Mexico and Donald Trump was really frightened. And I had this idea, I said, you know, if there is a bunch of folk who are dealing with systemic violence, systemic oppression, all of these things, then queer people are gonna be in there. Because, you know, I'm a queer person and we go through some shit. So I was able to embed queer journalists inside of that caravan, and we quickly found out that there were a group of trans people there. We found 22 of them, and they were leaving El Salvador. And they were hiding within this caravan, but within that caravan, they were being discriminated against even there. And what we saw is that on this ladder, if we're gonna play the Oppression Olympics, what we do find in that ladder is that queer folks that sit at the intersection of other identities are always at the lowest. And that gives you the depths of the problem right there. So we spent a month with them and got to Tijuana, which I've gone back to since then a few weeks ago. And what we quickly learned is that why that was so important to tell their story is that when they got to the border and Donald Trump freaked out, is that we have these queer women not only running from, you know, poverty or lack of housing, but they're running from the fact that the government would allow them to be murdered in parts of the country, or the cartel was chasing them. So very real violence. Violence that allows you to get asylum most of the times if President Obama was in office. So when they got to the border and they weren't being allowed in, we began to immediately know, once we focused on the stories and they went national, that this is the bottom of the barrel for Donald Trump. He's not gonna let these people in, then we know where the problem begins. And that's where you should invest the resources. So much about queer storytelling, for me as a journalist, is to do a lot of root cause analysis, is to understand where is it going, where is it happening, and to focus on those folks. Because if a trans woman of color can cross the border, then the children that are not trans, the mothers, all those people should be able to eventually cross too, theoretically. So it's for me is that we have to understand that the world is still set up in a dichotomy of, you know, male, female, straight, not straight. And those binaries are very much embedded within a queer theoretical framework, per se. So queer theory, what also is surprising lately, is queer theory, or queer journalism is not always about marriage anymore. I mean, you look at Pete Buttigieg in America, no one would call him queer anymore. That's a big debate there. And I've spent times with Mayor Pete, and he doesn't identify as queer either. And that's an interesting moment that tells us a lot about where we are as cisgender black gay men, is that this man's running in America, and the heartland is excited, but we walk up in there not excited. So what does that tell us about identity and where we all sit in this game called life? So I think the reason why, when we talk about the title of this is Queer Stories Have Power, is that queer stories are about power. Queer people are about power. And because we are a litmus test to where power is leaning and for whom and whom not.
And where it's absent.
Where it's not. So that's what's always attracted me to queer journalism. You know, I am also a racial minority in America. I heard there are places here in Canada where people of color actually outnumber white people. That's incredible. Mazel tov, that's amazing. I look forward to that world. Maybe. My mother's white, by the way. So, I mean, I was attracted to queer journalism over, you know, journalism focused on race, because of this idea. I think black journalists at like Essence Magazine and stuff can do similar, but there's something about sexuality and due to its fluid nature, where race is fluid to an extent. Like, a lot of you may perceive me as a lot of different things, and it tells you a lot about where you're from. Sexuality is literally fluid. I mean, David was talking about straight men falling in love with him earlier today, not to spill his tea. But like, he says he has a way with straight men, so if you have a straight man here, or if you are a straight man, watch out. But we know from the research that, you know, 1 in 3 straight identified men have had a same-sex experience in their life. You know, a lot of straight identified women have explored. So we know that with David specifically, that came out of the University of Toronto, that study. But something about sexuality is really, the fluid nature of it made me attracted. It made it really applicable to time, place, and space. So.
Let me ask you another question. So I work at McKesson.
Yes.
Most of you don't know what that is, 5th largest company in the world. I worked at Navigator. It was my first real job post other things. And I'm comfortable on Bay Street. I'm on the board of a almost 200-year-old club. I'm black, I'm gay. John's here tonight from Executive, and I want to thank him for helping us promote our event and get other executives who are LGBT identified in the room tonight. So can we just thank John really quickly? Thank you. John's also a partner at one of the most successful law firms in the city, in the country, really. So
is John single?
I mean,
Get to the point.
Right.
Don't bury the lead. John has a job. Does he have a man? This is not what you thought an editor.
I mean, he could be polyamorous. I mean, it's just,
right. It's a new queer
don't box
world.
in. Anyway, my point is, when we talk about power and we talk about progress, we've made progress.
Yes.
Right? I could get married. You now can get married in America. We've made progress. You made a decision to sort of harken back in history this month. Your first official issue as editor-in-chief, is that right?
Yes.
You went back to the original logo of The Advocate. If you want to look at the screens behind you,
they are there.
there's this month's cover. And you featured identities that would not arguably, that are definitely queer identities on the cover.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
That had never been on the cover before.
That had never been on the cover. Why did you do that? Why is that important?
Oh, God. That made me cry. I don't have feelings. So, you know, I've been in the editor-in-chief of The Advocate since January. And there's lots of reasons why I came to The Advocate, which we'll get into maybe, or we can talk about over drinks. But when I first accepted the job, the first thing I did is I went to the archives. There's an archive in LA at the University of Southern California. USC. It's called the One Archive. It's the largest collection of queer history in the world. And I went there and I had them pull the original advocates. And the first advocates, Advocate began in 1967. And originally was just a newsletter in a neighborhood of LA called Silver Lake, if you've been. And its original idea was to, it was a different name before that and all these things, but the original intent was to let folks in the neighborhood know about police violence. We know through the Stonewall riots that police were raiding a bar, and that's what caused this kind of backlash, and history changed forever. But before that, there were other forms of that. Queer people were getting, arrested all the time going into bars and walking down the street. This was a constant reality. So the Advocate was one of the first kind of publications to launch that was telling you about that. And they were reporting on the police. They were literally, as an openly queer journalist in 1967, saying, "I'm a queer man. Why are you doing this to my neighborhood?" Da, 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 da. And the first logo they did was this beautiful logo. It's a version of this, but this is an updated version, but it was that. And for me, when I saw the logo, something about it really clicked for me, was that, I stepped into this role and they said, you're the first Black editor in 51 years. I am not 51 years old. I do not know what 51 feels like. It's very theoretical. But when I saw that logo, 51.
It's okay for those of you that do.
It's fine. No, I'm just saying, I can't tell you what it means at 51 because, I'm open to that conversation. But I was recognizing my own position in this because a lot of what people were freaking out about is that people were excited that this young Black kid is taking over this magazine. But people were like, oh my God, this young Black kid is taking over this fucking magazine. What was he about to do? And Out magazine, the fashion sister of ours that's younger, had been taken over by my dear friend Philip Accardi, who ran Teen Vogue under Anna Wintour, who he's reimagined that magazine, and he redid everything. Literally just took it apart and rebuilt it. And I said, okay, I don't think a 51-year-old magazine can be just taken apart and rebuilt. I think the bones are good because I think our history is good. And The Advocate is a news magazine. And it's also a magazine that is an archive itself. It tells the story of our lives. It tells the story of the epidemic. It tells the story of Ronald Reagan first hearing of the disease in the 70s before we called it AIDS. And I said, why would I take all that apart? My life is built onto that. My career is built onto that. So I brought that logo back, and I always knew that. But then I was looking for the right moment to launch it, and Stonewall 50 became the obvious thing to do that. But what became even more obvious was I wanted to show visually that there were people who were alive back then that not only are still alive and fighting, but were fighting before we even knew the word Stonewall. And the elders you see there are folks that were fighting before the riots even happened. They were on the streets, and they're mostly people of color. They're women, and they literally paved the way for folks like Shellerman, who's arguably the most famous trans masculine person in the world right now. He's going to be the first trans superhero in Marvel. And he's Asian American, and he's also deaf. And he represents that Gen Z that's really expensive. That's queer, but queer isn't enough. The identity is really exploding. But his life could not explode unless they lit the match. And I wanted to create that visual. And the visual became tied to the logo, because people are like, this logo's so sexy, it's so new, it's so fresh. And I said, it's so old, actually. It's old. And for me, as a young person taking over an older magazine, is that we don't have enough intergenerational conversations. And I think young people don't know how to, and they want to. And I think folks who are older do want to engage. And we don't have the language or the bridge to cross. And for me, this became a bridge for a huge community to be you have people of every generation here. You all fight the same fight. The fight looks the same. The logo is the same. It kind of became this moment of when I was looking at the magazine, it was time was a flat circle. And the fights we were fighting are the same. And I think for us to get through what we're going through, especially in America, we have to understand that and really get behind that. And Stonewall 50 that's what that represents to me, is that we must kind of look backwards if we want to move forward. And the magazine covers became that for me.
Let me be open and honest. I'm looking around the room, and I don't want to make assumptions, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? But there's a lot of people that would likely identify as cisgendered and gay.
Yes.
I won't make assumptions, but I don't necessarily see a lot of lesbian people, trans people. I see one straight person who I have not had sex with, but there's still time. Two.
He meant straight male identified.
Yeah, sorry, Amanda. But so let me speak power. Marsha P. Johnson,
Yes.
Sylvia Rivera, trans-identified women, who arguably, it's interesting that even now, arguably, flew through the first brick at Stonewall.
Yeah.
Are we telling the right stories? Are we giving voice to the right communities?
Yeah. I mean, we're trying now. I think, and I think we were trying before, but trying before was difficult and hard. I mean, I understand the politic that was at play. You know, you have a community that was facing so much, and I get why when they saw that trans folks and gender nonconforming folks who were being thrown in the paddy wagons could not necessarily be the face in 1967. I don't think it's right, but I get the logic. And right now what I'm most focused on is, you know, reparations in many ways, of like, how do we correct what has happened? Because when I looked through the archives of The Advocate, it didn't look like me at all. Beyond there being an editor like me, my story was not literally there, but my life was tied to it. And so much of it's been unearthing that and refocusing it and recentering what happened. And these magazines covers are a testament to me attempting that, you know, having Augusta on the cover, an Asian queer man with a pen of Marsha P. Johnson. It's like, he's never been on a cover magazine. You've never heard his name. When we saw the Stonewall movie, you didn't see an Asian queer man with a big beard throwing a brick. Yeah, that was not there. So it's, for me, is a project of reparations, reconciliation, but also just making visible what was always there. When we talk about Black Lives Mattering now or Trans Lives Mattering now, we talk about it very in a contemporary way, but they've always needed to matter before. And when we look backwards at those histories, what you're seeing is the suppression of those stories. So it's our job to go back and kind of unstitch them and to find, you know, the trans voices in that. So like a good example today is like the Central Park 5 film that Ava DuVernay did for the series. Isis King, trans model, is in it because she's the sister to one of the young men. What I didn't even know was, in my job, I'm supposed to know every gay thing, that one of Central Park 5 had a trans sister. And it's because at the time, when the reporters came to the house, they didn't care about that. They didn't want to talk about that. Now we can talk about these things. And through talking about it, we got to talk about the shame and pain and the trauma of not talking about it, because I think why we're seeing so much change in trans rights or conversation is because we're talking about it. But anyway, it's just kind of this thing that like, now is the best time to try.
Now is the best
and Marsha did, I mean, they did so much work. I mean, you think about, the city of New York is launching or building a monument to Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. It'll be done next year. It's being designed, but it was announced and it'll be in Greenwich Village. And what is still so shocking to me is not only that they've never had a monument before for those two, but there's never been a trans monument in the entire world. That's number 2. And then number 3, the day it was announced, 2 Black trans women were murdered in America that day. And so we have this monument that shows on so many levels of like the fight for trans people, why we should remember trans people, but also the fact that trans bodies, trans Black bodies, trans brown bodies, can't even live on the street in which it's standing, that we have to create these statues for them to even survive time. And I think when I see these getting erected, I hope people understand not only the retrospective moment of that, but like the reality that like under that Marsha P. statue will be a trans woman of color sleeping one night that may not even live as long as Marsha did, and that we have to constantly deal with the messiness of all that. And the only way to deal with it is talking about it.
Talking about it. So you mentioned Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
This, I have not done the research, but I've scanned. Girl.
These two, I want to know how they met, why they hate each other.
We don't hate each other, girl. It's love. You should see us in a board meeting. But I would assume, so I'll make Michael honorarily Black today, okay? Girl. I think this is one of the first events. This is one of the first events in almost our 200-year history where the podium is exclusively Black and gay. Right?
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful.
You're Black? Shut up.
My microphone's falling off and shit, girl. Anyway,
I'll snatch that weed. For those of you that don't know,
everyone in here is like, why did I come to this?
Zach and I are friends, which is the problem. That's the problem.
It is a problem.
Yeah.
One I'm talking about in therapy a lot.
yeah, okay.
So in all seriousness, the Black Lives Matter movement and the queer community, or the gay, I would say the LGBT community, because I almost feel like, argue with me if you want, the LGBT community in some respects in modern day is almost drifting from the queer community. That's maybe problematic. So a few years ago, you and I were talking. I was marching in the Pride Parade for the first time, and I had the privilege to march with our Prime Minister. It was the first time a Canadian Prime Minister had marched in the parade. And
it was incredibly handsome. Sorry to interrupt, but you all won.
Girl.
Trump is not handsome. Trudeau's very handsome. Thank God for you all. Woo! If I had to look at that in the news every day, even if he does terrible things like here, I would be okay.
Send him a text. Amanda, send him a text.
Who's Amanda?
Let's calm down. Serious topic.
Yeah, sorry. It's Black Lives Matter.
We're in the parade, and Black Lives Matter was our honorary group
Yes.
in Toronto Pride. They shut the parade down.
I remember this.
And I remember I was close to the Prime Minister, and all these people that I thought were normal people marching in the parade, their guns came out, and it was like, whoa, and we had to move and hide, and it was... And I remember hearing the news narrative around the parade and the fact that it was being hijacked. And then I remember standing in the parade, and I'm not an activist. I'll be really candid and own my identity. I'm probably an advocate, not like the magazine. I advocate for a living, but I wouldn't identify as an activist. And I remember getting so angry when I heard some people say they're taking our parade. And I'm getting angry right now. And so I think about that moment that I had. Privileged, close to power. Justin was where Michael is. And and then thinking about this group that has been marginalized in the most apparent way, taking claim to a moment, and then hearing people of privilege, because you weren't around the Prime Minister if you weren't privileged, saying they're taking our parade. And I remember, and I'm going to say his name, and Bruce Lawson, my friend, is here. My friend Ronnie, who's a member of the Order of Canada, he was given the Order of Canada for his advocacy work on HIV and AIDS in Toronto. And I remember having dinner with him 2 nights later, and he spoke to me about, and Ronnie's story is public, you can Google it, he spoke to me about being in our own version of the bathhouse raids and being outed. And sort of being sort of this face that he didn't necessarily want to be, and thinking that he was angry about what was happening. How do you manage that as a prominent voice in our community with the editorial power of one of the most read publications and your own intersectionality? How do you, because Zach actually introduced me to McKesson, Black Lives Matter. DeRay
I was like, you work at McKesson, I didn't do that.
But who is
DeRay McKesson, the leader of Black Lives Matter. Well, not leader, a leader.
Unofficial leader of Black Lives Matter. And that was a moment for me. So how do you, and DeRay was not apologetic.
I forgot you met him,
Yeah. So how do you manage that intersectionality?
Whew, that's a lot to unpack. Okay, so for me, it's been an issue. It's an ongoing issue with editorial coverage. I took over The Advocate 6 months ago, January, and I've slowly been trying to expand how we do editorial work. So for me, what became different immediately was we're supposed to put the queer lens in front of every major story. So it's not just chasing RuPaul's Drag Race, but it's to say, a hurricane's hitting the coast of Texas. I need a reporter there to tell me about LGBT housing and how it's being impacted. So that's been a big change. And one of the bigger changes that happened very quickly was the conversation around Black Lives Matter and police violence, is that I began making sure that the reporters, and even myself, I would jump in and do the reporting to teach folks that we should report on police violence, because police are so tied to the community. And it didn't have to always be when a queer person was being attacked, but just general police stuff. And people were very struck by that, because so much of the gay rights movement was moving past police violence and creating a deal with them where they wanted to protect you, so that police can be at the Pride Parade and they're celebrating. The firefighters now wear, Pride memorabilia and not just ignore your house when it's on fire. And that took a lot of work, and that took a lot of politicking to get there. But through that process, Black and brown people were left to the side, and neighborhoods were erected, and only certain people of certain privileges, mostly white folks, were able to buy property there. So as a journalist, what became very apparent to me during the Black Lives Matter movement is that when I went down to Missouri and I was doing all these stories, is that I was like, these aren't just Black people, they're also queer people. I mean, how many people here know that the people that began Black Lives Matter are all queer? Is someone that did not know that? Okay, so people don't talk about that enough, but 3 queer women started it, and then a bunch of queer Black men like DeRay McKesson, Darnell Moore, all queer. I was supposed to be on the first bus to Ferguson, myself as a writer, to help them write the story. But it was queer Black people coming together. Because you know who knew the most about police stopping on the street and gunning you down? Were queer Black people. Queer trans Black people. It happened so much. And so for us, so it's 2 things. We have the perspective of the Pride parades erasing us and being they're stopping, because that year it happened in Chicago and New York, and people they're shutting down our parade. Why are they doing this? And it's well, they're also queer, and this is their parade too. They can do this. But also within the Black spaces, people are well, why are you wanting to talk about DeRay McKesson being queer? It took DeRay a while to come out, and he and I'd have a conversation where I said, you need to come out. And he's well, I don't know if people are ready for that. I said, they have to be ready for that. Because what people should know is that the folks that are most visible in the Black Lives Matter movement are Black queer people, because we're the most at risk. So that's all I've been focusing on, is telling the truth. And someone told me that during the time of Black Lives Matter. So something to note is that when I said that I almost came to grad school to do geography, is what you should glean from that is that I did not go to journalism school. I did not study journalism at all, which is very funny that I'm an editor-in-chief. And so I was a researcher, and what made me really sad about researching is that I didn't feel stories were coming through the data. I didn't know how to pull that out in the ways in which we're being trained, so journalism became a way to do that. And a friend of mine who actually lives in Toronto is a reporter, and he told me when I got assigned my first police story, I said, I'm not a crime reporter, what do I do? And he's like, go tell the truth. No one tells the truth about the police, go tell the truth. So I did that. And my first story was on with a friend of my colleague, because I was an opinion columnist for The Guardian, then I became a reporter. And my colleague that was mentoring me helped do the Edward Snowden stories in America that won a Pulitzer. And he also gave that to me. He was like, just go tell the truth on the police. If they did this, say it. Don't be afraid of it. And then that's when Mike Brown got shot and all this stuff. So but for me, it was just about truth telling. It's that like, we're there. I don't got to make it up. And you look at the Jussie Smollett case that is very controversial. I was in the midst of that, and that's a question of truth. Like, are the police telling the truth, or Jussie telling the truth? And the Advocate became like a leader in that coverage, because I was like, if anyone can carry this conversation, it has to be the gay magazine. It has to be the queer magazine. Because this conversation is that, we're really good. When I talked to Jussie, I was like, something's off here. When I talk to the police, I'm like, something's off here. Why? Because I lived through it. I've been through police violence. I've been through harassment. So that's how I'm dealing with it now. And I think when people reject Black Lives Matter, they're rejecting the truth, and that's not what we should do right now, in my opinion.
Don't reject the truth, honey.
More wine.
That was real serious. Here, some more wine. You want some?
We want to talk about something funny. We want to talk about Grindr.
Grindr. Okay.
Yeah.
Pull out your phones, people. We're doing an audit.
I already. Yeah.
So what
Could you
was,
imagine?
Could you?
People got like really tense. Like shit. Someone's like, I have scrap. It's fine.
Yeah. So one of you has it. I see you laughing. So let's get gay. So what was it? Yeah. What was it like to work at Grindr?
At Grindr?
Yeah. Could you see dick pics?
Oh God. I could not see dick pics there. So I know it's super boring. So how I got to Grindr was, I was a journalist. I was at The Guardian, which is very, prestigious, and I left The Guardian to go to Grindr, which everyone laughed about. My mother laughed about it. They're like, you have this great thing going on. Why don't you go to the Times? It's like, Grindr. That makes sense to me. But what I was interested in is what I've become very aware in media is that media has a hard time meeting all of you where you're at. Social media like Facebook delivers the thing that it thinks you want. You have a hard time getting, objective truth, or an attempt to be objective, or an attempt to be diverse in a way. So there's this distribution problem in media right now that like Google and Facebook control everything. Publishers don't have a lot of power, and then Facebook's going to keep serving up that cat video. And the reason why, and you're like, why does it keep giving this to me? It's because you click on it. That's like the trick. Like, stop clicking on it. Like, I swear. Like, you don't want more clickbait, don't click on it. It's like, really, it will go away. It's kind of like, I'm not going to compare that to that. Anyway, so what happened was Grindr called me, and they said, we are Grindr. We're very powerful. We have a lot of money. We have a bad reputation. But we could do a lot of good. And they had been doing a lot of work in the Middle East and North Africa, where they were engaging with police violence on the ground there. So folks were using Grindr in Russia to out folks and potentially kill them sometimes. So Grindr had built a team to deal with that. But then they looked at the US market and the Western markets. So they're like, what else could we do? And what Grindr realizes that they have 40 million registered users. They have 4 million daily active users that spend at least 1 hour a day on Grindr.
Wow.
Grindr is one of the most used apps in the world across every vertical. That's more than Facebook, Instagram. The things that beat it most are Google Maps, because you're driving. So
To your hookup from
to
Grindr.
your hookup on Grindr. So
Never been on it.
dear. I don't know. I have like the gayest job and I can say these things, but you weren't gonna cuss it. Like, you're just saying these things.
I know.
This is more radical than me.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Dicks. Sorry. That was like a holder. They could do like a search, dicks, and then kill it. I'm helping you. Anyway, Grindr called, and they had this idea. They're like, what do you think if we launched a magazine? I said, of what? Dick pics? I literally said that. And the chief marketing officer was like, no, it can be whatever you want. What do you want it to be? I was like, nothing. I don't want to do this job. He said, just fly out and talk to me. And I'll get very personal with you guys. So I was thinking, I was like, give me the weekend till Monday. I had a boyfriend at the time, lovely man. Won't say his name. And he was on vacation or a wedding or something, I don't know. He came home, and I was like, Grindr wants me to move to LA and launch a magazine. Literally broke up with me immediately. Was like, you're thinking about LA, this is over. And I was like, oh wow, I guess I don't need to be here anymore. So I flew to LA and I took the job because I was just broken up with and it was an interesting idea. And what they pitched me though, I would have left if it wasn't a good idea, was what would it be like if we were able to take up some space every day where these people spend an hour a day, and most of the time people on Grindr are not actually chatting with anyone. I mean, many of you have the app. There's only a few people you get a response from, mostly, unless you're like, some of you probably get a lot more than me. But there's different levels, but most Grindr users don't get a ton of messages. They just do a lot of scrolling and looking around. And I was like, what happened? What if we were able to like do a macro intervention and give them some news or some content? And what would that look like for traffic? And what could we do on like a different scales? Like not even like you think about the US, but think about the county level, like the county around New York City or the New York City County. If we could feed information, like whether it's public health, whatever. So I said, sure, let's try this. So I built a newsroom. Grindr had a newsroom at one point. It was under the name Into, which people did not know was owned by Grindr most of the time. And it looked very different. We had a big launch. It was in Times Square. It was everywhere. And it was nothing said Grindr on it. And we began for like a year and a half testing this project out around the world in different languages. And we were doing things like, I had reporters in Alabama writing about this very high profile Senate race between a guy named Doug Jones and Roy Moore. Well, you should know, Roy Moore, pedophile, Doug Jones, Democrat, state of Alabama has never had a Democrat. And they were trying to decide, do we want a Democrat over a pedophile? And it was a really tough race because it's Alabama. So I thought we can intervene here. And we did. And through the process, we were blasting Alabama users, which was, like 50,000 users, every day with reporting about Roy Moore, what he would do to your rights, what would happen here, what would happen there, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. In the process of that, Doug Jones' son realized that he was a homosexual and then came out on Grindr. And so it was like this big thing that just built and built and built, and then Doug Jones won. Doug Jones will not say Grindr helped him win. I will not say Grindr helped him win. But a lot of those users knew a lot more about Roy Moore who weren't watching CNN, because what we were dealing with in America right now is exhaustion from the news. Yeah. And people were spending more time on Grindr, more time on these apps to get away. So I was kind of this backdoor way to figure it out. So that's what I was doing at Grindr on the media side. And what you're about to see now, if you've not noticed, is that a lot of products like Grindr are going to begin launching newsrooms. So Apple is now going into content. Y'all think that's just for fun? No, they're about to launch news right into that news app of that. They're about to have their own journalism arm. Netflix is looking at daily programming. Bumble launched a magazine. Airbnb has a magazine because these apps want you to sit on them all day. And what better way to sit on an app is through content.
Give you news, yeah.
So you're about to, Tinder's about to launch a newsroom too, so it's about to be this crazy thing, I think.
Stories have power.
Yeah, stories have power. But then the other side of Grindr was I launched this campaign that became well known.
That was my question.
Sorry, I'm shutting up. So that was the media side.
Intragroup prejudice is one of the biggest hurdles we have to get over. Don't send your questions.
It's hard interviewing. So I have to say, David's doing a great job because it's harder interviewing someone that interviews people. Because it's like, you just want to back and forth.
So, to that story. You launched a campaign on Grindr. For those of you that have used Grindr before, I'm not sure how it works. There's, some people write in the comment section, not interested in Asians, blacks, femmes. Which is pretty ridiculous when you think about our identity as queer people, LGBT people, that we would then say, I'm better than, right? So what did you saw that. What did you do about that?
God, okay, so we're just gonna be among friends because I've been drinking. So, similar to when I said I became the editor-in-chief of The Advocate, people were like, what is this black gay kid gonna do? When I became the editor-in-chief and then chief content officer of Grindr, and I publicly bashed Grindr, I was on Trevor Noah's show bashing Grindr before I took the job. I was like, we're about to do some things that are gonna be fun. And this lasted for 6 months before I had to leave. But this very radical part of me at Grindr. But I, as a black queer person, have faced these messages. One of the first times I ever met a boy online, when I was a teenager in one of those old chat rooms, you remember you used to in these chat rooms and talk to random people. Long story short, met someone, realized he lived close to me, lived in Tennessee. He told me when he realized it was me, this can't work. You're black. You can't be black and gay. We live in Tennessee. And my heart was broken. So I've held that chip on my shoulder till I became an executive at Grindr. And then, in a very real way, I was like, how do we have better conversations on Grindr? What's a better way to tell someone you don't like them than just saying, oh, you're black, goodbye. Yeah. So I sat down with our team and we wanted to revise our moderation of photos and our community guidelines. And I was like, let's just ban the words no fats, no femmes, no blacks, no this, no that. And instead force people to talk about it. Yeah. And then give them stuff to talk about it with. So that became Kinder, which is a campaign. It launched, won a bunch of awards, a Webby Award and a bunch of impact awards. And the purpose of it was to launch a series of campaigns where I invited people who are on Grindr to come in these really beautiful videos and bash their Grindr experience, where they're like, this terrible thing happened to me, transphobia, fat shaming, HIV shaming, all this stuff. And for Grindr, we just wanted to lay it out and be like, we hear you, and this is what we're gonna try to do to change it. What we learned really quickly is that, racism, homophobia, aren't quantitative issues. They're very qualitative. They're very complicated. Words kept evolving. You know, we would ban one form of a word and people would think of a new icon for it. People were really invested in that. So it became this really complicated project, but it did raise a lot of awareness because when you would open up a Grindr message for a little bit, it would say, in the bar, it says, say something or say hi. We changed it to say something kind. We got these messages about how to talk to people. So we tried this macro level intervention. Did it make Grindr less racist? Hell no. Because what we learned is that Grindr is just an overlay to the real world.
Yeah.
And it's literally what you're dealing with Grindr is just this focus of what's happening on your block, on your streets, in your city.
Yeah.
And we needed to have more coalition building outside that project. We weren't that important in it.
Yeah.
We are important that we're a space in which it was happening, but we needed to do more work outside of just the tech space, but with like other groups and neighborhoods and stuff like that. It's a huge project, and we gave it an attempt. And then I left, and then I think they've stopped trying to make it less racist since I left. But it was a moment of like, haha. But I did try to take the filters out. And they went, the Grindr has filters. You can race for filters, or filter for race.
wow.
But what was crazy about this, and there's two things that I'll say and we can move on from this, is that filters are not always bad. Like I learned, I always assumed it was always just to say no black people, but there's ways in which people find community through filters, through like the pause community, folks that are sober, all these other things. And I was like, wait, we have to have a bigger conversation about like capacity building with each other. Like it can be identity based, but it's like what the intentionality behind that identity. And I don't know if Grindr's ever gonna be the space in which I can be like, you know, I wanna connect with only black, light-skinned people because I wanna talk about our oppression and how we are dealing with our own colorism that we project onto dark-skinned people. Grindr's not gonna be a space for that, sorry.
We'll find other spaces.
But a history that people do not know, and someone raise their hand if they've heard this, do we know why gay men especially are so obsessed with the phrase no blacks, no femmes, no coloreds, all those things. Don't say colored, but like it has a history. Does anyone know this history? I love this room, because no one's written about this enough. So, we were talking about bars earlier. Bars were getting policed by the police. Queer people were getting kicked out of them. What would be a really great way to find a gay bar in the 60s? Does anyone have a guess?
It's interactive.
No? What was that? Say that again. Talk to a friend. That's a good guess. Exactly. So if you're a police officer driving down the street, you know, living in Jim Crow America, you see, in even the 40s, you see a white man walk in a room, a black man, a gender non-conforming person. You're like, what is going on in there? It's a gay bar. So signs began getting erected in certain American cities where they would say, no blacks, no femmes, no et cetera. And it was because who owned these bars were mostly white men. And they wanted to protect the space, so the police wouldn't go in there, or the police would get pissed off if there were a bunch of black dudes in there.
Yeah.
Interracial, this we're dealing with race. So this intersectional issue comes ahead through a gay bar. A gay bar is a very diverse place, and you think about these times when like you literally could not share a watering hole.
Yeah.
Gay bars were being attacked then. So this is like a history that's carried forward that people don't talk enough about. This is not an excuse for the behavior, but it gives you more historical context. It's not something Grindr created, sadly, because it would be great to blame Grindr. But it's situated within history.
Yeah. It's funny, I was at a Airbnb did a movie this year. They sponsored a
Content,
movie this year
tech companies doing content.
called
Examples.
Gay Chorus Deep South, where they sent a San Francisco men's chorus into this thing. So I was at the premiere. I was fortunate enough to be invited in New York. And there was a producer there, a famous one, and he was actually talking about a show that many of us may have watched called Pose, which is a remarkable show that tells a story that I think needs to be told. And he was talking about a scene in one of the episodes where two of the main characters go into a gay bar.
Trans women of color.
That had that sign, no femmes, no blacks. And so it's interesting that story is sort of well known in Hollywood communities. It may not be well known.
It's coming forward. And I think when you have these moments, and thank you for letting me share that with you, because I think you're like, like I think what people should understand most, and what I've learned most as a multiracial black kid that's queer, all this stuff, is that, you know, we're not born harboring these oppressive thinking. It's a learned thing. And what you all should know with whatever you're battling is that you did not create that thing. And it's not totally up to you to solve it, and you should have a little more grace in dealing with it. You should also have more compassion when people call you out for it. It goes backwards and forwards in a way, but you should know you're not that important. And these things started way before you, and you are a vessel to keep them going, and what's really important is that you choose to stop going forward with it.
What's also interesting too, though, is the reality around the reflex of us no one wants to be at the bottom of that ladder that you talked about. And I remember when I had my own journey and my own self-actualization around my identity, my parents, who are relatively supportive, they love me. They hate the sin, not the sinner, right? My father, who I love, his biggest concern was, you're already black.
Yeah.
People are already going to judge you and think you don't belong, and you're not going to be able to do what I know you can do because of your skin color. Why do that? That was, and I remember being so mad when I had that conversation. I was like, this guy's a, and then as I got older, and I started to love people in a more authentic way, my nieces and nephews were getting older and sort of competing and applying to universities and colleges, I got it. I was like, he's not right, but there's a trigger there through his own lived experience. So I have the fortune to be your friend and talk to you whenever I want to. There's a room full of people here. Colleen has a microphone. Are there any questions in the room or comments that we want to give? Yes, there's one in the back here. Girl.
I'm going to ask a Canadian question on queer stories versus U.S. stories. And to be clear, we're largely white men. Clearly, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
But my observation would be that most of our LGBT organizations formed post-rights. So if I think of executive, it formed post-rights. And if I think of Pride at Work, it formed post-rights. And I think of Start Proud, which is millennial, both Y and Z, and within Z, it's the most diverse group ever, and they get super upset if they're not completely representative. And still we get together. And within the stories, to date, your stories have been, for lack of a better word, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the people dealing with the shittiest things. Versus we have a bunch of people in Canada who get together and connect more for the higher levels would be the theory. So within the queer stories, because I get it, the sad stories reminds us what we're fighting for, but in the Canadian version of it, and again, it's probably a Canadian privilege, my sense would be is we connect differently. So maybe not to challenge you, what's the positive version of the queer stories that, why are we all continuing to connect? Or if it's the 50th year anniversary, and it is for us in Canada, 50 years from now, will we still connect? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something I struggle a lot with is telling sad stories. It's a problem with being a crime reporter for some years. But I don't think we do a good enough job of talking about the things we should celebrate more. I mean, even to my credit, in a way, these covers actually don't go that deep. They go deep, but they don't go dark. So they're mostly celebratory. That was like the nicest thing I've done all year. Most of the time I would be like, here's a murder cover. This is some terrible thing that happened. But it was something I'm challenging myself to do, and it's something I've been talking to my editorial team. On Fridays, we're like launching a new newsletter. It's like, breathe. Here's all the greatest things that happened to queer people this week. We last week launched a list called the 104 Champions of Pride, which was 104 people from every state in America that are doing great work and that are not famous, that are not being heard. What we struggle with in the digital age is people caring about non-famous people just living their lives every day. It's a struggle, but I think it's something I should fight harder to do because we do see moments of when it does become a rallying cry. The other day at a Mormon college, Brigham Young, in America, a young man came out as gay while he was giving the valedictorian speech, and it was all over the internet. And that was a really great moment. And I wish that moment came every day. Those moments do happen a lot. We don't talk about them enough. And I think what I struggle with, as speaking for myself as a queer person, what I challenge myself a lot is that I get comfortable with the bad because I grew up with mostly bad. Like queer people are so traumatized, my God. That's why our dating lives are terrible. You grow up hearing that you're not normal, that your life isn't regular, that the marriage you want isn't real, and then you're thrust out into this world and told to have a healthy relationship, and you're like, what am I supposed to do with that? So I think like even with how we occupy politics now, it's hard, even though we have this moment in America where we have 137 openly queer people elected to office. You read stories about them mostly, it's critiques, tear downs. What are they doing wrong? Why is it so bad? Why are they police officers? All these things. So I think like I love what you're suggesting, and I think it's something that I need to probably present more to folks is that like we should focus on the good than the bad.
Can I float something?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so open to feedback. You could yell at me right now and I'd be like, yes, thank you. I have been yelled at many times at these things.
I think 50 years from now, we will still hang out, and having good sex is a side benefit of being gay, we hang out.
A privilege, sorry.
No, better blowjobs, whatever. You know how to use the equipment. To me, it's a neurodiversity thing. So, like, to me, the more we dive into the neuroscience that actually discovers we have the male and the female brain, and they're actually cross-wired better, which means that we happen to be better at math and better at language, which means we are disproportionately architects or other creative classes. And my husband and I both have the shorter finger, et cetera. Like, within any of the indicators, if we assume for a moment that being gay is a side effect and we focus on the neurodiversity, like, a bunch of the stereotypes are true. When I hang out with the trans people, most of the ones that I know are amazing in technology. But, you know, in either version of the transition. Like, to me, 50 years from now, I think we're the cutting edge of God's experiment, doing different things with brains, and sex is a side effect, and your gender choice is a side effect, and separately, we're an experiment in creativity and the creative class and all of those things. And to me, it would be wonderful to answer that question a little bit more, because we still all want to get together. And to be clear, we're not going to, despite the jokes, go on Grindr and have fun together. We're just going to connect because we connect with people and we have a common life experience and everything else. Like, the 50 years forward, not to put a challenge, to me would be a fascinating discussion, because I would like to believe that even if we completely mainstream, we will still connect somehow as a community.
I think you're right. Today's not about me, it's about Zach. There's a question here in the front. I will use the platform to challenge the room a little bit. And the challenge I'll issue is that we shouldn't wallow in sorrow, right? And I was raised by ministers. My brothers are both ministers. So there is a power in the reflection and the sorrow. But if we don't speak the story, we forget that we are leaving people behind. James, it's a shame Jamie's not here. He is in France, and he wanted to be here, and he's offered us his space. But I worked for Jamie for 4 years, and I'm gay, and Jamie gave me power because he brought me to boardrooms at CIBC and Macmillan and McCarthy's and said, you're going to present, you're going to hold the room, you're going to show people you're smart. And that helped me sort of jump and be who I am. And then he said to me once when we were at an event, and someone came up to me and asked me to get their car. I'll never forget that moment. And he was like, that's insane. And in his mind, he thought, I've never seen that kind of racism, and that's what I'll call it, that's my lived experience, in this space before, because in this space, there's financial power. There's economic power. So I've never seen that before. And then he reflected, he shared it with his staff and his team, that he wouldn't have seen that because I was one of the first black employees at the firm. Now there's many more. And so as I live through my own experience, and I work at a company of 90,000 employees, and there aren't very many of us who are black in the senior levels, there is that power, their absence of power, there's the absence of mobility, and if we don't remind ourselves of that, then we do leave people behind. We do create a situation where Black Lives Matter feels like it's apart from or distinct from LGBT movements or queer movements. So we have to tell the good stories and the celebratory stories, but you can't not see color, you can't not see gender diversity, you can't not see oppression, because then you leave people behind.
No. And something I want to say before, because you said stereotype, and something I always say when someone says stereotype at these is a quote I heard. I don't know who said it, but stereotypes are just stereotypes are good because they're just a chapter in a book you haven't read fully. And I will leave you with that. So. I think I can't hear you on the mic.
Can you hear me? I can yell very loudly.
That's good.
So this is a question for both of you.
Podcast.
Hello?
Oh, there you go.
All right. So this is a question for both of you. So I'm going to say example because I assume that you have many of these instances.
Okay.
But can you give us an example of someone in your lives who you know, whose story or work or lives give you hope for the future?
Wow, that's a good question.
Woo! Hope for the future. Oh, God. Oh God, I have to go sad. It's not sad, it's empowering. I don't know. I'll tell this. This is the first thing that comes to mind. Sorry. I've become very invested in the border at the US. And I'm in LA a lot. And I was in Tijuana recently. And Tijuana is where a lot of folks are sitting and waiting to enter the US. And I was there recently and I got to meet a house that's there where 30 LGBTQ people hide and live their lives in secret that are trying to get across the border and is waiting. And I got to sit down with them the other day and meet a lot of trans women and queer families and all these things. And they have been through some of the most terrible things I've ever heard in my life. And but sitting there with them in this house where they got to wear their hair was like they want it, they got to speak how they want it, to see what it's like to have a space where you feel free and accepted, made me leave Mexico and go back to LA more excited to go to work every day. Because I got to see that even in the worst moments of your life, that if you see hope, you will get out of bed, you'll keep fighting. And right now I've been thinking a lot about the immigrants, the refugee seekers that are trying to cross the US border because they're seeing what Trump's saying, they're seeing everything, but they still have so much hope and they will do anything they can to get across. And you look at these queer women, these trans women who are risking everything to be there, and I got to see them smile and laugh. Made me be like, you know what, we can figure this out. We should figure this out. If they can get there, I can get somewhere. So I pull a lot from that. I look at a lot of the photos we took and think a lot about them because it is so, I think it's so important right now. So.
I'll be brief and I'll say that your life gives me inspiration.
Stop.
I mean it. And I say it for two reasons. Your ability to tell stories and to engage people is inspiring for me as someone who tries to do that on a more corporate level. But more so than that, you've reminded me of the power that's in me. Zach and I have been friends for a little while, and Zach has the ability to navigate circles like this with me and to be himself and to be authentic and to challenge people to show up. And Zach's given me, and I'm going to say this, and it's on a podcast, Zach's given me my blackness back. And as someone who's had a very successful accelerated career on Bay Street and in America, I was working in the US for the last couple of years. We've been in moments where you've reminded me of the power of my blackness and the importance to be unapologetic about it, and I really appreciate that. And I think the more we celebrate that, the better. So thank you. Right here in the front.
Glad I need a tissue or something.
First, thank you so much for your talk, which was really enlightening and lovely. You know, just to provide some context, here in Toronto, I'm on the board of some of our HIV/AIDS organizations, so the AIDS Committee of Toronto and Alliance for South Asian AIDS Prevention. And one problem we have in Toronto, at least in my view, is that in our institutions and in our organizations that engage with power and wealth, we don't have a lot of representation in terms of the diverse elements of our community. And given your position as the first, black editor of The Advocate and now occupying one of those positions in the United States, how do you see the landscape there? How do you see the peers at major organizations, funders, that kind of thing? Are you an anomaly, an exception, and how does that affect how you are received in those rooms and what you can say?
I would definitely say similar to in Canada, I'm an anomaly. I mean, it took 51 years for to be any person of color to lead a major queer magazine or a major magazine. I mean, The Advocate has the same circulation as other niche publications. So you look at, not Rolling Stone, but others, whatever. We have readers. I am the only one a lot of times. I'm usually one of the few. I've sat on lots of boards. I'm always the only one. And for me, what's really frightening there is like how fragile that means it all is. Like you look at my career, if I was to leave my job, I don't know of another editor that I could give the reins to because they haven't had the training, the experience due to systemic racism, due to systemic classism, all this stuff. I was lucky because, of certain familial circumstances, certain things that happened in my life, because I have my own privileges that helped me get there. But I think we're still in a very fragile state, and we should not be overly zealous that, we have queer people on a board, whether they're black or white or whatever, that we finally are occupying there because it just happened the other day. And it can be taken right back. So I think it's very sobering. So whenever I hear like, I'm the first black person, I'm like, oh, that's frightening. That's not good. Like it's a lot of applause lines, but I'm like, we need more. We need more of this because if I get hit by the car when I leave here, then we have no more. And that's not good at all. And it can go right back to what it was. So I think when we talk about what's really important right now for folks to understand is that representation, goes only so far. We need real big system changes. Like, you can't just wait for a Zach or David to go to the right private school and the right this and right that to finally bubble up. You got to think about, why does it need to be that path? Why to build the system that way anyway? Why can't we change it to make it easier for other people? And when I say, I don't want to say easier because it makes it seem like they're not ready. But why don't we start valuing different types of life experiences for these positions? Why don't I see more folks that didn't go to college steering nonprofits? They are the ones that may have been more close to the services and could probably tell you where to put the money better than anyone else. So I think we need to think about the lived experiences over the resume more, which is hard for folks in power because folks like yourself or myself went to a lot of schooling, spent a lot of money to get these things. So I just think we got to think about, like, what is success is a much broader way, and then allow that types of success to enter those spaces. And that's why you're not seeing it happen fast enough, is because that ladder is tiny. It's kind of like this lobster in a pot. There's only a few of us that can climb out fast enough. The rest become dinner. So until that changes, it's not going to change at all, which is the sad part. So you got to think about it systemically, which is like a very academic term. Gross.
I have a question here in the...
Yeah, you brought up Mayor Pete and his rejection of queer identity, and I would just like to hear more about that intersection between queerness and class, especially as specifically white gay men continue to achieve certain levels of success. What does that mean for the queer identity as a whole in terms of that intersection?
I think we're at one of the most fascinating moments in queer history or history, or LGBT representation, whatever you want to call it. And what I'm obsessed with Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten is that they're making us understand that identity is not politic every time. That you can be gay, but it does not mean that you believe in abolishing prisons or that you believe in, healthcare for all or all these things. Pete does believe in some of these things, but I'm just saying he represents a less radical representative of what could be occupied the presidency than what's before. I mean, in America, there's a woman named Joan Jett. She's a black drag queen in the 90s. She ran for president. She's technically the first person to ever run for president in America that is queer, but we don't remember her because she's a black drag queen. After that was Fred Carter, who was a Republican in 2012. He did quite well, and we don't remember him because he doesn't fit into that narrative. But Pete is fitting into a narrative, and I think that should tell us a lot about queer politics right now. That he can be on the cover of Time magazine with his husband, and there were no protests. There was nothing changed. And I remember even an editor at Time magazine told me, he said, this is one of the straightest covers we've ever done. And I think it wasn't a critique, but it was just like, we've arrived at this moment in which you can imagine same-sex couples in some ways. Believe me, there are also protesters following him around, depending on the locale. I'm speaking from someone living in New York right now. That's the privilege of that. I think Pete is very radical from where he's from. For South Bend, Indiana, I think incredibly radical. But we're having, through Pete Buttigieg, to think about the geography of queer politics, that within a South Bend, Indiana, very radical. New York City, you look like my neighbor. And we have to think about that our bodies are parts of lots of bodies and lots of politics around the world. So I think right now we're understanding that we have to demand more out of folks than just saying, oh, I believe in Black Lives Matter, or I believe in this. You gotta ask, okay, show me the policy, show me the way through, show me what liberation means to you, and who's even there when we get there? Who do you want out of it? So I think what's great about what Pete Buttigieg does is that it demands us to ask better questions than, should America have a gay president? It's like, no, it's not a great question because that guy could have been Fred Carter, and you don't want his policies, maybe. He's a Republican. If you're conservative, whatever. If you're conservative, maybe you like him. But I think we're understanding through these moments that we as queer people, because there's a lot of us here, or gay identified people, we're very complicated people. We're very expansive. And we are not just defined by this word. And this word is a big part of how we move through the world, but we can keep pushing past it and reimagining it. And I'm very excited for that. I still find a lot of power in calling myself a gay man. And many times I find myself with more power, I'm from the South, saying gay than queer, which is a weird thing to say, but there's something about, I fought so hard to say gay my whole life. And queer has become this really expansive term, and I think it's very powerful, and I talk about queer politics like that. But I don't know, you have to find where you find your own future. And for me, the future I never imagined was sitting up here with y'all and saying I'm a gay man. And that will always be powerful to me, and that will be me. But for my children, my friends that are the young people on the streets, voguing, they want to say queer, or sissy, or whatever.
Sissy that walk.
Something.
I think we have time for one more question, yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask about women.
Yeah. Woo!
The few people in this room not on Grindr.
A few people not on Grindr.
So as you can see, we still have some work to do here.
Yes, yes.
And I chair the board of Private Work Canada. We struggle with this across the country. And I've talked to women in other countries even, and they struggle with it. Just curious what the conversations are around engagement of women in your circles.
Oh my God.
Briefly, of course.
Okay, we can be brief. So there's this weird moment, and I will probably be dragged if people are watching for this. We're in this interesting moment where in queer journalism, queer politics, the two groups we talk most about are trans women and gay men. These are two groups that are discussed a lot. Trans women, it's because we want to talk about death and homicide and these awful things. A lot of times gay men, it's about like wealth and power and all these things. But these two have become these ways of us projecting certain things about the larger community. What we're missing are like bisexual people who make up like 32% of the community. They're vast. Also, bisexual people have had access to a form of marriage for a lot longer, and we left them out of that conversation about how we can reimagine marriage, but that's a whole other thing. But queer women, lesbian women, because lesbian, I've learned as an editor, queer women and lesbian women, there's a huge political debate around that because lesbian is still not a word that we talk enough about, and we haven't talked enough about. And in queer media, I've been in conversations with advertisers where they'll say, well, what do lesbians want to buy anyway? Why do we want to sell to them? And I was like, they buy everything that other women buy. I don't know what you're talking about. But what I've seen in the data is that queer women are hungry for representation and content and seeing their lives displayed in the public. And we're seeing that kind of rise finally in the US in politics. This year, we've elected 4 openly lesbian women to mayors of major cities across the US. Gay men keep losing, lesbian are winning. Don't know what's happening there, but we should focus more on them. You're very organized. Very organized, yes. But there is a way in which we live in a patriarchal society in which misogyny is rampant, women are seen as less than, and queer women especially, are erased tremendously by queer media, by queer men. And it's really tough to fix, because even when we try to think about it on a digital level, even these Facebook algorithms are like, let's promote these gay men that are naked over like telling a women's story. Or if women are telling stories, it has to be a very specific type of story. So I think we still haven't battled or figured out our ways in which we've kind of reduced women to only specific types of narratives. And queer women still sit in this weird space where they're not allowed to be complicated. And I did this story recently about same-sex marriage. And there's new data coming out. These are fun facts. So same-sex marriage, we've had it enough in America where we can glean some thoughts about trends. One of the trends is queer people are better at marriage than straight people. And when we say better, we mean their divorce rates are going lower than straight people are. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we've reimagined domesticity. So we don't assign gender roles to certain tasks. We have, due to societal reasons, have had to reimagine relationships, so we're more interested in open relationships positionally. So anyway, all these things. But with women have these really complicated marriage trends. They actually don't cohabitate as long as gay men. Gay men find a man and they like lock him down forever. Women are having higher divorce rates, and the researchers are trying to figure out what's going on there, because they had all these ideas that if 2 women got together, of course they want to sit at home all day, because that's a stereotype, and be together. But no, women in this moment want to be active in the world, and they're battling all these ideas around their gender, whether it's from their partner or from the world, and the world needs to change, so the partners will change. So I don't know, it's tough. And I think the only way to fix it is to hire more women. So like my newsroom is more women than male identified. Yeah, it is right now. So that's a way that we're trying to correct it, but it's the larger media environment is still women. They only think women's media is like Cosmo.
More gay men read Cosmo than women.
Cosmo's great, but
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the room.
Yeah.